Hi, Tim.
Hi, Cleopatra.
Let me just start by saying a big thank you to Anna and Mr. Berstianis and Politeia for taking on the challenge to present the Veto in Nicosia. My name is Cleopatra Kitti. I am a supporter of Tim's work for multilateralism and peacemaking. I've been a supporter of International Crisis Group, which is a global NGO supporting peacemaking and conflict prevention around the world for more than 20 years. And it was through the Crisis Group that Tim found me and asked whether I was willing to support his work on producing this documentary. And we've had a lot of exchange about the merits, who is behind it, what triggered his interest, who are the other like-minded donors. And as a global nomad, or a person who has lived around the world, and as a person who grew up, I was 10 years old when the conflict erupted in our country, I made a mission for myself: if there is one thing to give back, is to prevent conflict and promote peace. So it aligned very well with my values and my commitment to global governance and rule of law. So I welcome you today because I feel we are all like-minded if you are all here to see Tim's work. Just to say that we will see a short version of the documentary. Tim and I will have a chat to get you a bit more into the insights of the making of the documentary. We screen, and then Anna Koukidis and the Honorable Ambassador Andreas Mavroyiannis will chat a bit more about the intrinsic value of effective governance at the UN, as Mr. Mavroyiannis has first-hand experience and in-depth policy making at the UN. So again, thank you, and here we go. Tim, welcome to Cyprus.
Thank you.
Nicosia is the first capital where the team is screened, and the third city, global city, that is being screened after Geneva and Washington.
New York.
And New York, yeah. So the fourth city. So let's get us behind what inspired you to start working on the UN veto. What's behind it?
So I'd made a film several years ago called The Destruction of Memory, which looked at cultural destruction. And through that, not so much in the making of the film, but afterwards at screenings, that film looked a lot at Syria and cultural destruction there. And so through that, because of the many vetoed resolutions on Syria, particularly the one around the International Criminal Court, the issue of the veto became clear to me. So I'd always had it in the back of my mind. And then when Ukraine was invaded, I was struck by people, including some journalists even, who would write, well, you know, the UN will kick Russia out. And you know, obviously the veto prevents that. And so the sort of, I suppose the impetus to make the film now was both the situation in Ukraine and then the multiple vetoes to do with Gaza, which the US was wielding. So the way that these, you know, two very clear, I would say, misuses of vetoes was happening, became also very clear, I think, to the general public. And so it seemed like the time to address the veto, particularly around misuse of the veto, but also to look at it as a sort of a lens through which to look at the UN and how the UN functions and doesn't function, and how that imbalance of power, which you referred to in your introductory words, is present, and how hopefully to minimize that imbalance. So
what we are saying is that the UN, being the home of international rule of law, a home of multilateralism where a lot of other institutions depend on, and a lot of innocent civilians and countries around the world depend on it to make the right decision. Yeah. It's being confronted with an intransigent position of the P5, the 5 powers that sit in the Security Council, which are UK,
Russia, France, the United States, China.
They keep us in a position that defends interests rather than the wider good.
Yes. And so, as you'll see in the film, particularly, it looks at the idea of veto misuse and the way in which France and the United Kingdom have committed to not using the veto in these situations, but the P3, Russia, China, and the US haven't. And so I think, it's important to look at this now as well because of the new US administration and the way that changes the playing field. So there was a resolution in February of this year, which I'm sure some people in the room know about, where I almost expected France or the UK to veto because it was the US and Russia sort of together on a resolution about Ukraine. So I think, certainly from my point of view, that was a real turning point because that opened up a whole new sort of shift of the way the system works, especially between Russia and the US.
So we shouldn't also forget that, we have conflicts near to Europe and to our region, but for years there was abuse of the veto for Africa and a lot of genocide and pain and killings in Africa because the veto didn't work again as it should. So how did you approach the research? How did you identify the people to interview? How did you go about? Was there any surprising element in your process that came up without expecting it?
I mean, it was initially it was difficult to find people who were exploring the issue, and so I think the first person I found was Dr. Jennifer Trahan, who has written a book about the issue, and then through her, I was connected to Prince Slade of Jordan and to Christian Veneveser and others who've all worked on the issue in different ways that you'll sort of get a sense of in the film. There's more of it in the longer version, but essentially, these people had separately seen the issue. In 2011, Prince Slade started to approach it from within the UN, and then he and Ambassador Veneveser sort of devised various ways around the veto problem and the fact that it can't be just simply got rid of because that can be vetoed in itself, but ways around the charter to try to implement this. So sort of through then the stepping stones of being connected to other people, I was able to sort of get more of a diversity. I'd interviewed Fatou Bensouda before when she was the ICC chief prosecutor, so I talked to her then about reflecting on Syria and Palestine and Afghanistan.
How long did it take you to?
I was done fairly quickly, really, in the end. So I think
because there was this propensity of the dialogue and the debate amongst key stakeholders of the region. Do you think the film or the documentary could inspire change? Could inspire a public dialogue, a civil society engagement? What do you hope the film to do?
I really hope so. I think in the lead up to UNGA in September, and given that it was the 80th anniversary of the Charter a couple of weeks ago, I hope so. I think there's more public push. I think the voters are sort of getting more behind issues, and I think making that clear to elected politicians and to foreign ministries. So I hope so. I think, obviously the UN as well is in a position where it needs to protect itself, I think, both in terms of funding and in terms of perception. And I know the UN can be sort of difficult and unwieldy to move because of the bureaucracy and various things, but I think it's the time to sort of implement changes quite drastically because of that threat. I think we can't, as you'll see in the film, we can't do without the United Nations, because without a multilateral meeting point, then smaller states simply have to go to Moscow or Beijing or Washington and negotiate. I think that would be disastrous, particularly for smaller states.
We are in a liminal moment, aren't we, where
So.
there is this shift from multilateralism into sort of trading or exchanging or trading off with the mighty and the strong countries, rather than sitting around the table and debating.
Yeah.
So you think there is momentum? Do you think smaller member states can coalesce and create a moment of a dialogue or a push?
Yes, I think so. I mean, Martin Kamani, the former Kenyan ambassador, talks about this more in the longer version, but I think that, smaller states banding together is crucial, and civil society. But I think, both of those things need to come together. It's not in the film, but Martin Kamani pointed to something which was referred to in your opening speech, that we can't come back to the UN after a third major global conflagration. That's, as we know, that's too risky to chance now, given nuclear weaponry. And so it has to be done now. I think the impetus for change can't be on the back of some disastrous
Another
war.
Disastrous war.
And so that's why, it's important, I think, for example, that the General Assembly consider going to the ICJ to rule on the veto and the potential limitations of its use, because at the end of the day, Russia and China and the US won't like it, but they have enough power and they will all sort of, as we know, ignore the ICJ anyway. But I think it has to be on the record. And I think then it allows other member states to do what they have to do, perhaps to uphold the rule of international law.
Create a legal precedent.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's part of your aim, to push for a legal precedent.
Yeah.
Before we close our very brief chat here and let the audience watch the short version of the documentary, I'd like to sort of bring it back to Cyprus. And as Mr. Peristianis also mentioned, our entire foreign policy as a country, our premise for resolving the division and conflict on our island is based on UN resolutions, is based on US peacekeeping forces here, is based on a framework of negotiations that is defined by UN rules. Do you think as Cyprus we are treading a fine line on the effectiveness of the UN being an effective institution that can carry us forward, both into the existence of the Republic of Cyprus or the future of a unified country? Are we again at a liminal moment where we have to be aware of what's going on in New York to be able to shift or redesign our thought process here?
I think so. I think that shift was the way that the P5 use and don't use their veto, and what veto threats may do, and whether you can rely on someone to not use the veto or to use it, is something that plays into Cyprus's future. And I think it's why too, for example, there was a resolution passed on a ceasefire in Gaza, which and so if that's not implemented, then what does it mean if there is a resolution passed on something crucial to do with Cyprus, particularly around where there's an issue of crimes against humanity? So I think, it's all interconnected, and so that's why, if Cyprus is relying on the United Nations, then it matters what happens in other cases as well, and that the UN is functional.
Which is not at this point,
right.
or is at a high risk not to be functional. So,
and I think this may come up later, but I'm not sure I don't know the reasons why. I don't know if it's been stated. I haven't looked at the news, but when I was flying to Cyprus, the fact that at the BRICS conference that the leaders of Russia and China didn't turn up then potentially, I'm not sure, takes out BRICS as another multilateral possibility. So it seems we need a multilateral forum, and given that the UN exists already and that perhaps things like BRICS aren't going to work as effectively as we maybe thought they would, then it puts more of an onus on the UN to work.
And it also puts a responsibility on other countries in the world that believe in multilateralism to push for change at the UN and hold the torch of peacemaking and conflict prevention. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for being
Thanks,
here,
Cleopatra.
Tim Slade, and for making the UN Veto.